I'm Andrew Scott. I lead a consultancy called Positive Connection UK. I have a long history in decarbonisation, working previously with Runner Trucks, where I led on their decarbonisation efforts. I really have, I guess, the OEM voice here. I've been part of many consultations in terms of responding. Strong view that everybody should respond, because if we don't tell government what we want to happen, then we can't be surprised when we get what we don't like. Just one other footnote to my current role. I remain the chair of the SMMT's Heavy Commercial Vehicle Technical Committee, which is the forum at which the OEM voices are brought together. So I've been having many conversations on this subject, and are really keen to bring the operator's voice alongside those. I think we have something approaching an industry view, so it's really important that we take the opportunity to present that at this time.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Matthew?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Matt Adams, head of electrical transport systems at BEMA, the trade body that represents electrical appliance manufacturers, and so I work with around sort of 40 companies working in and manufacturing charge points across the UK. But previously, I've sort of led a working group for about 3 years, an industry working group for about 3 years on commercial fleet electrification, bringing together about 40 companies working on the charging sector before that. So yeah, I've had a reasonable amount of time working on fleet electrification policy, and I spend my day-to-day working on policy, regulations and standards.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key part of that, is the understanding of policy and the understanding of what's possible versus what's being asked, because we can shout from the rooftops about things that we want, but unless it translates into something that the civil service can actually deliver, then you're kind of wasting your breath, aren't you?
I think this is the huge challenge that actually, whether we like it or not, trucks aren't very sexy and therefore don't enjoy a high priority within government. So unless we can find ways through the existing legislation, the chances of us achieving any sort of common airtime to review these things is pretty limited. And without being rude about our elders and betters, we don't have a great deal of commercial vehicle expertise in government at all. So it's really important that we actually take advantage and speak in our language into government, so that people who are on our side, and there are some of those, and do actually have some messages that they can take back into people who are, if you like, less aware of the issues that are genuinely stopping decarbonisation happening here.
I should also mention that we do have Tim Campbell, who's been invited to the call, but he is having connectivity issues, so we might see him pop back up with some hot takes and some opinions during the course of this chat, or we may not. It'll be a nice surprise for all of us. I'd like to start with, I guess, what is the core question from the consultation, which is, what is actually on the table? The consultation presents 3 options for this roadmap to decarbonisation. Matt, do you want to run us through what those 3 options are?
Yeah, of course. So, so as you mentioned, there are kind of 3 options, and there's also an option 0, which is do nothing. So we'll ignore option 0 and focus on the key 3 options. So option 1 is incentivizing CO2 reduction among trucks, new trucks being put onto the market. So whether that's through changes to aerodynamics, or through a gradual increase in the number of electric or zero emission trucks sold each year. You then have option 2, which is the thing that a lot of people have been talking about for the last couple of years, a ZEV mandate for trucks. So basically saying that every year a certain number of trucks have to be zero emissions at the tailpipe being sold, and that's been sort of it's talked about as being split between 2 real categories, one for below 26 tonne, one for 26 tonne and above, sort of in line with the existing requirements that I'm sure people know about already for the phase-out dates in 2035 and 2040. And then lastly, is option 3, which is putting a requirement on large fleet operators to actually purchase the trucks as well, which I think is quite an interesting difference versus what we've seen for the car and van one. And I think it's been something that maybe had car manufacturers and van manufacturers had in the past, they probably would have maybe put up less of a battle against the original purpose of the ZEV mandate when it was first introduced.
Do you think that the smart option is probably far more complicated than the question is asking, and that it is a combination of those measures and how they interact in a way that isn't unfair to any particular party and is structured in a way that, for example, smaller operators aren't getting left behind and tier 1 operators have a huge advantage, and not everything is put on the OEM. It does feel like there should be demand and supply side pressure as well as incentives to move. And is that too complicated to push through in a framework like this?
Good question. I don't think it would be too complicated. I mean, if we look at the car and van ZEV mandate, it is quite complex in terms of the flexibilities and requirements that have eventually sort of developed over the last kind of 3-4 years. And I think if you'd asked anyone in year one whether or not they envisioned the ZEV mandate today, the car and van ZEV mandate today, to be like the one it is, they probably could never have thought about it, right? But it's developed over time in a way that has been able to better support the transition. And I think that the nice thing about how this consultation is laid out is that a mixture of 3 options will put different requirements on different actors. So each individual actor will have actually quite a clear direction on where they have to go within this.
Andy, presumably the OEMs are quite keen that all the burden doesn't land on them.
I think that's the point. When I was at Renault was when we brought the ZEV mandate in for vans, and to DFT's credit, the actual implementation was much simpler in reality than the consultation that went out beforehand, which had so many caveats and loopholes and different criteria that we pushed back quite hard to say, look, this is not going to be, nobody's going to get their heads around this. Never mind be able to actually change their purchasing policies. So there's quite a lot of listening has gone on and is reflected in the consultation there. But there's no question that the HGV market is very different to the LCV market. You can't force operators in the way that to an extent you can do with a van. And you and I were part of a session when Lorna McAteer from National Grid said, look, I as one of the biggest users of vehicles, commercial vehicles in the country, vans was being told by the OEMs, if you're going to take 100 vehicles off us, 10% of them or more have to be electric. You can't do that in a truck. Well, the two are hugely incompatible at this point, partly because large commercial vehicles are so complex and so individualized, and partly because the market simply doesn't work that way. You're not buying big batches. Most of the guys listening to this will be thinking about 1 or 2 vehicles. The big fleets will be looking at 5 or 10 vehicles, and the very big fleets are the ones that are actually sort of identified within the consultation as those who are best placed to make these changes. One of the other things that I'm involved in is EHID, and we've seen there that where you can shape an incentive program, then you can create a purchasing model that actually addresses some of the cost concerns of operators. But it's a very nuanced picture, and so I think you're right, Jamie, in saying that actually we're going to end up with some sort of hybrid of each element of this, because none of the 3 solutions in their own rights will do it. Vector isn't enough. It's not delivering the pace of change. So option one in that case, it's not delivering the pace of change that we're talking about. We don't believe that a Z mandate to force the OEMs to supply a certain number of electric vehicles can work. And I would struggle to imagine how an operator mandate of them taking a proportion of their vehicles as electric would be either fair or reasonable. So I think we're going to end up with something that is, as you say, a sort of hybrid of all three.
I think we all agree that there is still a huge amount of low-hanging fruit out there with electrification, and I think if pushed, it would force operators to consider it a bit more thoroughly, and that we would probably find that there's actually a lot of scope to put more vehicles on the road relatively easily, and that problems in that world would probably come from two places. It would be the development of the technology over the next sort of 10, 15 years and the development of infrastructure over the next 10, 15 years. But also the individual type of operation. So it's not all operations are created easily. Some will have a huge amount of low-hanging fruit. Some will have almost none, and treating them all, painting them all with the same brush could be, very, very dangerous and very unfair to certain types of operations that might exclusively do very long routes, exclusively carry very large payloads, for example.
We had a lovely case, just to give you a bit of sort of background from previous life. Renault had a very good relationship with a company called Allen Hingley Associates in the West Midlands, and they carry steel. So the core of their business is steel. So if you were to apply a Z mandate to them, saying 10% of your vehicles have to be electric, it's just madness. But as you say, one of my frustrations, sort of having been involved in this for a long time, is that people are dismissing the concept, despite the fact that those of us who have explored and if you like, analysed the market know that there's a great deal of low-hanging fruit. I'm involved through Voltempo with a project that Transport Scotland are promoting at the moment under their HGV Readiness Fund. And we have no doubts that we can bring a lot of vehicles into service into the Scottish environment without having to work too hard. So part of what they've done to preempt that is enable the small fleets to actually have some independent analysis of their suitability for electrification to take place there. And then hopefully we'll be able to bring some proposals to bring vehicles into different applications, supported by commonly shared charging in the Scottish environment because of the geography of the landscape and the split of vehicle use. But like you say, Jamie, I'm convinced there are a lot of electric vehicles that could come into service. ZHID's big weakness is that it's been focused on tractor units, and so we've actually missed out to an extent on all of the rigids that are operating in our cities where the capability of the trunks is probably already well up with doing pretty well everything that those vehicles would be asked to do.
I suppose you're then looking at the idea of exceptions to these various schemes. So maybe an operator would need to apply to not be included in whatever way, and there would be some amount of burden of proof or evidence that you're having a harder time than other operators. But that then introduces loopholes and ways to sort of sidestep it and would allow people to put off making that move. I guess, Matt, is that something that is likely to be included?
I mean, I think it's that there are always exemptions in all these sort of all these policies and regulations, and I see no reason why it wouldn't be sensible to do the same here. I mean, from our perspective, obviously, we want to make sure that they're very well defined in terms of what those exemptions are, so that we still have as much certainty as possible going into the next 5-10 years. That we have enough certainty in terms of the number of new electric HGVs we see on the road and being adopted by fleets, that there is enough certainty there for investment in charging infrastructure, which will ultimately enable a lot of this to happen as well. And I'm sure we'll go on to this a bit later about some of the missing links in the consultation in terms of other enablers that we need to make this happen. But I would say without a couple more enablers, the case for exemptions, whether they're financial, logistical, or operational, will probably increase. So I think we need to be careful with the consultation, that there are other enablers considered and brought forward as well. And I don't believe the current level of government support and funding that's been announced over the next 5 years will be enough as it stands to support this as well as it could do. So if I understand correctly, I believe there's around 500 million announced over the 5 years of this parliamentary term, or this government, shall I say, for charging infrastructure, which is the equivalent of about 100 million a year. And a lot of that, of course, will be used on public charging infrastructure, particularly. We're seeing lots of money go into things like Levi and other grant funding. And obviously, we've seen quite a nice grant come out over the next for the next 3 months, which I think people definitely should be aware of. The new grant for trucks, which gives you, I think, up to 125,000 pound off the cost of your truck, depending
120 or 40%, whichever comes soonest. Yeah.
That's it. I think it's also key. So I think we do also need to talk about what other support mechanisms are needed to enable all this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The other big part of this is this idea of the 2035-2040 split, with 26 tonne and below being on one side of it and the larger vehicles being on the other. I have some quite strong opinions on this, in as much as I don't think the weight class of a vehicle has almost anything to do with how difficult it is to decarbonise that vehicle. A large Arctic doing shuttle runs between a customer and a depot is very, very easy to electrify, whereas a little 7.5 tonner that's doing multi-drop around the depths of the Cambridgeshire countryside might be very, very difficult to decarbonise. And again, it goes back to that sort of variety of logistics operations. So is that Vecdo Group strategy the right way to go? And is there scope to completely flip that on the head, or are we too deep into that idea of categorising vehicles by weight classes?
From my perspective, I think it makes total sense to look at it from as you say, that perspective, as otherwise we do run the risk of putting a lot of burden on some operations, on some routes that will be very difficult, if not impossible to do. What that will ultimately lead to is a situation where we just have less, where we don't hit the targets we need. If we have an HGV set mandate, it'll be more difficult to hit them. There'll be more uncertainty, and ultimately what that will end up leading to is, when there's a statutory review, that any targets we have might be pushed back, and there'll be more arguments to align with countries that have maybe gone down a weaker route to decarbonisation, which would ultimately lead to greater levels of uncertainty. So I think if there are any ways to make it easier to hit those targets, then we should definitely explore them.
Andy, I'm sure you've got thoughts on this.
Yeah, there are two important statements in the consultation, which may make the task a lot easier. The first is that for the lighter weight vehicles, that TCO parity between in terms of purchase price and operational cost will come in line between diesel and electric in the second half of this decade, and for the heavier vehicles in the first half of the next decade. So before we actually reach that point of legislative change, the expectation is that the economics will have taken care of themselves. Now, I have to say that wearing my OEM hat for a second, that rate of balancing has been much slower than anybody would have hoped for. But actually, we have to remember that we are still an island and part of a much bigger global sort of economic system. There's no question that as we see some of the lower cost new entrants entering the market, I'm obviously talking about the Chinese products coming in, that there is going to be a lot of downward pressure in terms of the capital cost. And to an extent, the OEMs, in my experience, have been quite happy with those end dates of 2035 and 2040. the weight is, as you say, a bit of an arbitrary sort of differentiator, and was really just to reflect the complexity of the Arctic model in particular. But my personal view, backed up with a little bit of OEM experience, is that those dates will hold and will not be as painful as people at this point, looking from where we are today ahead, perhaps feel, because the economics will really get taken care of themselves, that the vehicles to purchase will be that much cheaper. And a lot of the work to support those in terms of charging infrastructure and all of the other elements that of the ecosystem that are concerning people at the moment will largely have been addressed by that period. So my personal view is that they won't go away. I think within the document, again, there's a request, and Matt was talking about there, is what are the exemptions going to be? What are the vehicles that are not going to be decarbonisable? Those hard to decarbonise vehicle sectors, and there aren't going to be many of those, I don't think. I think our own view from a technology point of view is that the electric vehicles will do pretty well everything that is going to be asked of them. There will be a few niche vehicles. Some of those are covered by SDGO regulations at the moment. Those heavy haul vehicles, those very specific applications that are really demanding of fire engines, for example. And notice they were also mentioned there. Those in early conversations with London Fire Brigade, they have a legal obligation to be able to go out to a fire at an immediate notice. That means you've got to have a charging solution, or you've got to have an alternative means of powering those vehicles. So those are the sort of things that I think the consultation is asking us to identify as an industry.
Do you think there's a danger in the cliff face of just 2 dates, and that something a little more granular might be of benefit? I think as an industry we lean towards making decisions at the very last minute, and what you might find with a hard split like that is that a lot of operators will wait until 2035, buy their last diesel vehicles, and then work it out from there. And that's going to put strain on infrastructure and OEM supply chain and a whole host of things.
To express the views that we've experienced in the Scottish situation that we're going through at the moment, the operators, the smaller operators, don't have the bandwidth to think about these things, and that's not to be critical. It's just, this is hard. So I understand why people would not rush to take advantage. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Voltempa proposal, the project scale as it's called for the Scottish, is to create a mechanism that makes it much easier for the smaller businesses to engage with us. Jen, you're an example of that. Welsh is a comparatively small operator in the grand scheme of things. But by going early, you have built that experience within your business that is preparing you for all of these changes that have to come. It's giving you insight to new revenue opportunities in terms of sharing your charging infrastructure with other operators. It's giving you a new message that you can take out to customers. So my encouragement to all of the small places, just keep your ear to the ground, try to find out who's going to help you make some of these steps forward. And if somebody's going to make it easier for you, take advantage of that. If you're a fleet operator in Scotland, speak to me and we'll try to get you involved in project scale. But genuinely, the Scottish have been able to learn from some of the experiences here. So they're looking at a national system, and they're looking at not just at the central belt, but they're trying to work out, right, how do we decarbonise the whole of Scotland? They're doing it perhaps a little bit more strategically than DFT have done with Seahead. And certainly we as part of those who are bidding for that funding are trying to make it as easy as possible for the smaller operators to engage with us. We'll build on the associate program that was part of the E-Freight 2030 program, where people could take vehicles for shorter periods of time. We're leaning on the OEMs to create offers that actually that operators can if you try to fully buy, they can get experience without making some of the big financial commitments or the big strategic decisions that are scaring them off at this point.
Of course, Scotland does have the advantage of having far more power and energy than they know what to do with, which is a huge boon, isn't it?
You say that, but as with the rest of the UK, it's not always in the right place.
It's not in the right
It's certainly
place.
not always available when you want it. And I can certainly vouch for some challenges are on the front, but you're right. They have lots of green power, and they will have lots more, obviously, with some of the investments in wind power that have been authorised even this week.
I'd like to look at, I guess, the things that maybe aren't included, or some points that would make this all work or fail. Things like infrastructure coordination, things like TCO trajectory. I guess what isn't the consultation talking about enough?
So it's interesting. So BEMA are currently leading on a piece of work with DESNZ called the Growth Plan, which will essentially be part of a wider strategy by government to enable electrification, but also particularly looking at how we enable investment in the UK for the new infrastructure going in place. And one of the key bits there, and one of the key enablers, of course, is skills, which I think, building on to Andrew's point earlier, we're going to need a lot of in order to deploy the infrastructure, etc., that we need over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so I think one of the key things that we need to do better with when we respond to government and consultations, but also the government needs to do is, connect different policies together a little more effectively. So we saw that the government have introduced a new skills strategy when they came in. Was it last year? It feels like a long time. Last year, and so I think there is a need for more enablers to be deployed for things like skills as well, and to talk to industry about what they need. But there's also, I think, lessons we can learn from other government projects. So if we look at things like Levi, one of the key things that's been set up is a sort of knowledge repository where local authorities who've already deployed on-street charging or cross-pavement, either through pilot schemes or at scale, are able to share their learnings and how they effectively did it. And I think taking Welch's as a great example of a company who've done it well, having access to case studies that small fleet operators and even larger fleet operators can access and learn from would be, I think, a great way of being able to move this a lot quicker. And of course, that's the sort of thing that can be set up at quite low cost, one imagines. It would be quite an easy enabler, I think, to actually share knowledge and move things forward more effectively.
I suppose the big thing is the distribution network. So you can put all the mandates in the world that you want on operators or OEMs, but if you can't get the energy to the place where the trucks are operating, then there's literally nothing you can do. And the timescales of those pieces of work are much, much longer than the timescales of delivering trucks into an operator.
I think some of that is recognised. I mean, it doesn't take away the pinch points that exist. It doesn't take away some of the land grab that has gone on in terms of potential access to charging. But it does feel like a little bit more recognition of the importance of some of these strategic elements. We touched on briefly the plug-in truck route earlier on and the depot charging scheme. Both of those seem to be worthwhile levers to improve uptake of electric vehicles at this time. And while budget profiles only allow those to be committed to the end of March, I believe there is a desire to extend those beyond that period, i.e. into future funding periods. So the depot charging scheme, as a case in point, is one which, for those who can get access to where the energy is in the pipe, they at least can look at the other, if you need the second priority in terms of decarbonisation, decarbonising their fleets, which is getting some funding for some of that charging. And I think we're seeing a lot of the private sector now coming forward with potential solutions for the shared charging, and we've obviously seen the finances of this roll up and ending. But there's quite a lot in the pipeline, from partly stimulated by ZHIT and partly by the market itself, of organisations recognising that there is commercial opportunity for providing these systems and making the investments. The other good news is obviously these are generally coming from an energy background, so they're used to longer payback periods than we tend to experience in our world. So they're willing to make those investments, knowing that the market is going to change over a period of time, and therefore they're going to get a return on the investment. Excuse me, over a slightly longer period than we traditionally think of within the freight world.
One thing that I read in the consultation that I wasn't expecting to see is this idea of credit transfer, turning CO2 into a market in itself, which already exists in some capacity. Do you think that's a positive thing that we should be leaning into, or do you think that is a road to madness?
I mean, I honestly, at this point, having seen the battle over the last 4 years around flexibilities for the car and van ZEV mandate, I would almost rather we just have this in place from the start, so that we know for certain what's going to happen in future, and also give the manufacturers a little more headroom, I guess, to be compliant, which I don't think is a bad thing if it provides more certainty. So although it's not my preferred mechanism, I think I wouldn't be completely surprised or unhappy if it was introduced, simply because it would provide us more certainty, and hopefully also it would mean there would be less ongoing scrutiny by some news outlets over the effectiveness of a mandate, as we saw with the car and van one, where due to significant media pressure and pressure from other sectors as well, that the mandate was constantly under review from about 2023 until, well, pretty much this year. And we're still seeing, even more pressure, despite the amount of flexibilities in there, for a review to take place even quicker, which I don't think makes sense. But I think having the flexibility, the maximum flexibility in place from the beginning, would at least provide us more certainty. It's not necessarily what we'd like to see, but at the end of the day, it might just create a more calm policy environment to make better decisions.
I think for me, Jamie, one of the attractions is to start to see a value to carbon savings. That's been a weakness in the industry for a period of time, because those who have taken the bold decision to invest are not actually getting any rewards. They're taking many of the costs without necessarily getting any of the rewards that should come for that. It's written very clearly through the consultation document that the social benefits of decarbonisation are not being that replicated or represented in terms of how vehicles are being selected. So if we begin to see an element of value attributed to those carbon savings, then I think that is to be welcomed. I think there is more that government can do in terms of some of its sponsoring of infrastructure projects, for example, and some will know that the low Thames crossing has baked in some of those carbon savings and incentivised the operators who go above and beyond that. I think we need to see more of that, such that there is some element of demand pull for decarbonisation within vehicle choice, and that will help, and is in many senses for me a more attractive government investment, shall we say, than some of the direct sort of sticker price incentives that other people are asking for. I think we have to change the argument a little bit, such that it doesn't seem as sort of weird for people to actually go for a zero emission vehicle as it is at the moment. Then I have a huge amount of respect and sometimes sympathy for those who've been bold enough to actually make these statements. you've got people like Jeff Tomlinson at FSEW who are saying, well, of course I'm doing it and working very hard. But a number of the other bigger fleets have put a toe in the water without necessarily advancing it to the level that we hope that they would. Some of that could still come, and may still come with some of the LCV fleets and some of the commitments that some operators have made. But it needs to be a little bit less sort of front page news and a little bit more business as usual for me, and that's something that I really aspire to. So if we can see a degree more literacy around the wider benefits and putting a value to those, as we're talking about here, I think that is a value. It also gives the operators who are the OEMs in this case, who are a little bit behind the game, a route to manage some of the financial issues that they will face from non-compliance. And I think that's actually a lever that if I was in government, I would be looking to pull as well, because I think it helps us get to that end game of a zero emission or net zero emission transport system much sooner, because we can help people find their way through what is a fairly complex and financially challenging transition.
How should operators engage with this consultation? The trade bodies and the NGOs and the tier ones, they have a department dedicated to this stuff. They're very used to it. Should we be encouraging the majority of operators to all be making their own submission, or do you think there's more value in trying to reach some kind of broad consensus on what's important and pushing from a collective basis?
I mean, it would be wonderful if we all agreed, right? So, obviously, ideal situation is, of course, we engage as many operators as possible, because ultimately this is going to impact them the most in many respects. And whether they choose to submit their own or go through their trade bodies, whoever they may be, is entirely up to them. I would say, having worked for a couple of trade bodies now, we really value any input we get from any members we have, but ultimately, there will be points in a trade body consultation response where they're not able to provide necessarily the punchiest responses, because they have to provide a consensus view based off their wider membership. And so I think it's important, if you have specific issues, that you still submit your own consultation response as well. Otherwise, ultimately, some of those key problems, which might end up being an exemption or something like that, might not be picked up.
Matt's right. A membership body has to represent the views of its members, so it can be as pointy and outspoken, perhaps, as an individual operator should be. But that's really, it's really important that DFT hear those individual voices. You don't set yourself the task of it's not like a blooming homework assignment. If there are 10 questions or something like that within the consultation, if you just want to make a point, I can't decarbonise because I can't get power in Willenhall or in Cambridge or whatever it be, flipping make that point. I mean, because one of the challenges that I think DFT faces is that they are fighting a battle in a very, very big pond here. DESNES are involved, DBT are involved, all these other, Treasury, heaven forbid, are involved. All of these strategic decisions have to have data. And so if DFT are able to say, actually, as part of our consultation, we had operators in Inverness and Willenhall and Cambridgeshire and in Cornwall saying we cannot get access to power, then they at least start to get more of a customer-led voice rather than just some Nancy consultant like me saying, "Oh, it's quite difficult." Yeah, this is a government that is claiming to respond to the people on the ground. We've seen with the rail exercise, the North's quite important to the current government. So we actually have a strategic plan that then actually is built around it leads to Brentford, leads to Sheffield. There are very specifics in there. And I think by operators taking a short time, half an hour or an hour out of their time to actually make a response, that will help DFT to make the pointy arguments that they need to do within the wider government sphere this is what we need to decarbonize. We've made these commitments. We have made these legislative commitments of emissions reductions. This is how we get the benefits. We get it by actually investing in the grid such that there is a national system that is built. People have access to these, that we invest in depot charging systems so that people can put charging in at their sites. And those are the direct outputs that we can aspire to from this consultation.
I suppose there's a key point there that you do not have to answer all the questions. You do not have to write a long essay about all the intricacies of CO2 emissions, but if there is something that is particularly challenging to you, then you should absolutely be raising it and shouting as loud as you can. Otherwise, your voice won't get heard at all, will it?
My view when I was with the OEMs was, if we do not invest in this case through the SMMT in getting our voice heard within government, then why should we be surprised when there's no point in bitching about non-experts creating legislation. If you're the expert and you want input to that, well, it's your own stupid fault for not actually taking part. So, sorry, slightly unspoken language, but that's the point. If we can't throw rocks at people if we're actually not telling them how to do stuff better, and sometimes it feels like we're banging our heads against the same old brick wall time and time again, but actually we have to do so, and this consultation does reflect a lot of the things that people like us on this call and people listening to this podcast. These are the messages that we've been putting into government for a period of time. So let's please keep making our voices heard, and we will slowly see those changes in policy and hopefully the support that is necessary to bring about the change that we want.
Yeah, it's probably important to flag as well, of course, that this probably won't be the only consultation on this. There'll probably be a second or maybe a third as well as the policy develops and as the government's position is developed. So I think that will be sort of, now is the time to engage with government, but now doesn't stop probably for 3 or 4 years of consistent engagement, making sure that you also develop your own positions internally and talk to your wider teams, making sure that you take on board all viewpoints in your own business.
Yes, before we close up, is there anything in this consultation which is an obvious win that we should be encouraging everyone just to tick and say yes to? And conversely, is there anything in there that is likely to trip people up and might be a route that we don't want to investigate too heavily? I suppose for me there is a piece about what zero emission means, and it's alluding to things like hydrogen internal combustion engines. I'm very outspoken about the fact that I think battery electric is going to solve 99.999% of our problems in this country, and that's not something that we should fall back from.
And I think I agree there, and I think if you do enable hydrogen combustion, then you're essentially saying, well, we don't mind CO2 as much, but we do mind CO2, but we don't mind nitrous oxide emissions going into the atmosphere, which is just as harmful, if not worse, in many respects for people's health. So I would much rather we go down the route of a clear definition that rules out nitrous oxide and CO2. Otherwise, we will leave ourselves to enabling a technology that will ultimately be worse, which I don't think anyone wants.
There's a lot of pushback at the moment on low carbon fuels generally, and it is referenced within the document. I don't think the worldview has actually changed on that. When we were starting the electric conversations 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, we recognised things like biogas had a role to play. I mean, biodiesel is still not going to make an impact. HBO, all of these potentials have got pros and cons. I think there is a recognition that we have to make a graduated change here, and therefore I welcome anything that's saving CO2. I think that is we stuck our head, or some elements of our society have stuck our heads in the sand and said CO2. It's somebody else's problem. I actually have children, so yeah, they already think I've burnt the planet for them. So I'm keen to do anything that actually eases some of that problem. Is the document missing anything? I think it's not bad. I'm with Matt, though. I think this is part of an ongoing education and iterative process. This is not the end game in itself. I think it goes some way. For me, I'm very much against a ZEV mandate either on manufacturers or on operators. I think neither of them are actually going to get us where we go, or where we need to be. So I think we have a government that DFT certainly that is willing to listen to views and welcome that. I think it's beholden on us to take advantage of that and to engage with them, whether that's through a response to this consultation and or further opportunities to join roundtables or to influence the direction. We have to take every opportunity. It's arguably we've not made the progress that we could have done over the last 2 or 3 years, but I'm going to keep working to try to make sure that we take those small steps, because this isn't back to your comment about the cliff edge. We cannot wait for that cliff edge. It is just a disaster waiting to happen that will have horrible impacts on so many people. So I'm happy to work with the small gains that we can make. First of those is, right, let's respond to this consultation. Let's say what it means. Let's make sure that government at least know that Andy's got haulage in Warwickshire has a problem because he can't access electricity, or the trucks are too expensive or whatever. Please make those voices heard. RHA, Logistics UK, the big industry bodies will make their inputs, but let's make sure each one of us has the opportunity to express our view, and then we'll see some of that reflected in those future iterations that has talked about.
Agreed. Thank you, gentlemen. Is there anything that you expected us to talk about that we haven't touched on?
It's been a pleasure. Look, this is important. I think those of us who have been engaged in this decarbonisation debate for a period of time realise none of us have backed off the importance of it, and therefore we have to take every opportunity that we have. This, I think, is government belatedly reaching out saying, tell us more. So please, those who are listening, take that opportunity. It's not that painful a document to read, but please make your inputs, and then those of us who are hopefully going to have the opportunity to respond in person will take that up on your behalf with government, and hopefully we'll actually make the progress that it is.
And if you're confused and you need help, or you want more support in maybe what you should be doing, then reach out. There's so many people in this world that are just more than happy to help you on this journey, whether it's a consultant or whether it's a trade body or whether it's a solutions provider. There is a huge amount of support out there of people who have been doing this and been working on solutions for quite some time now. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.